Hey, everybody. Hopefully the sound is working okay today. Welcome, or this evening. This is a guinea pig. You are my guinea pigs tonight for my Saturday stream. I usually don't do this, but I thought, why not? Let's do a Saturday stream and talk about risk, because risk is something that I think is extremely overlooked in most forms of investing, especially with peer-to-peer lending. Something I certainly overlooked when I was learning how to invest. And I think it's something that really needs to be focused on, not only by peer-to-peer lenders, but also by the peer-to-peer companies, because sometimes that risk may not be very well advertised. And, there are some companies that are experiencing some problems right now in actually the UK and the US that have not really disclosed how much risk has really been prevalent to investors. One thing that I can current example is in the US, there's a United States oil fund. If you want to look it up, the symbol is USO. And this is basically a fund that's supposed to track the futures of oil contracts. And they've just had some really poor risk disclosures. Of $4.5 billion fund, and the fund lost 75% of its value and was therefore investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commissions for not advertising how much risk there was with this fund. So I think, not only with stock market investing, but particularly peer-to-peer, we sometimes really not aware of risk. And then, what we can do as investors to really minimize the amount of risk that we're taking for the returns that we're really looking to get. So that's the topic for today's discussion. This evening's discussion. I'm here in rainy Florida tonight. Anyway, it's nice to see everybody. I'm glad you can hear me. Hi, Colin. Hi, Alan. Peter, Mike, Chica Boy. Nice to see you all. Hi, Steve and Solihull and Egham. And hi, Keith and Lincoln. It's nice to see everybody. And the reasons I do this stream, it's been really a pleasant experience to interact with you as being readers of Financial Thing. And I had a couple of hours to spare. So I thought, let's talk about risk. Hi there, Scott in Scotland. Scotland. Margate. I think Margate is that seaside town, right, where people used to go. Hi, Dave in Newcastle. Nice to see you. So if you have any questions about risk, you're concerned about your own personal portfolio, how risky it is. Have you evaluated your own portfolio as a whole, not only with peer-to-peer lending, but also stock market investing, and anything else maybe that you do? Pop a little comment in there so the other people can read what you're up to and maybe some of the concerns that you have and some of the things that I could give you little tips and whatnot and how we can really try to look at that risk. And also a lot of things, that I didn't think about when I began investing through peer-to-peer that only come through experience. Some of the borrower fraud that I've experienced, some of the peer-to-peer lending companies that really haven't done a adequate job with risk mitigation and things like valuation experience and things like that I think some companies really failed on, and some have done really well. Some do better than others, so we'll kind of chat about that. Hi, Chris Monk, John Day in Nottingham, Rodney from Culverstone, round the corner from Cufflink. Rodney, if you are around the corner from Cufflink, and their offices are usually open, I don't know if the COVID has affected that, but they have free ice cream in there. So go get yourself an ice cream at Cufflink, and you can sit down and have a chat with them about if you're not an investor. Hi, Caroline in Somerset. That's where the farmers, isn't that where they make the clotted cream? Is that in Somerset? Yeah, I can understand about that, Keith, with Grove Street. I wouldn't say anything particularly scary at the moment. Obviously not the best circumstances with Grove Street, but I think that they are trying to decide the best route of action for them. Hi, see Mr. Smith is in Manchester. And Carol, Somerset is known for cider. I do enjoy cider, more than beer. So very unusual for an Englishman not to like beer as much as cider. But yes, definitely, I'm a cider drinker. So Hi, Saravana Subian. That's an interesting name. Hi in Manchester. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us on the stream. So, as you know, I started peer-to-peer lending in 2015, started looking into it in 2014, but there was just so many things I didn't understand about the inner workings of how peer-to-peer company operated, and also, how they chose borrowers, interest rate spreads, what kind of risk I was assuming when I took on loan deals, especially with manual investing. And there's just so many different forms of peer-to-peer lending out there now. We have small and medium enterprise lending, small businesses, medium businesses, a company like Assets Capital or Rebuilding Society and Lending Crowd. They tend to specialize in those types of loans. We have the property-backed loans. There's plenty of those. Crowd Property, Cufflink, Invest and Fund. We got the pawn-style loans through Embolted. We got even specialty investments like buy-to-let cars, where you can actually buy a car and be a peer-to-peer lender and have them loan the car out, and you get paid on that. And you even have litigation funding on court trials now. You've got credit card, and there's just so many different things that you can choose as a peer-to-peer lender. So you really have to pay a lot of attention to the risk. I was completely naive when I started. I assumed that all peer-to-peer companies were very competent at what they did because they were FCA authorized, except for Collateral, who said they were, and turned out they weren't. I assumed that a lot of the loan deals were, worth what the valuation said they were worth. That was a poor assumption on my part. I assumed that things like student accommodation developments were really solid investments because I thought, well, students are going to need a place to live. So if a developer's putting up a building, how could you go wrong with that? I assumed a lot of the assets that were being lent against were in the possession of the peer-to-peer companies that were lending, especially back in the early days when companies like MoneyThing and Funding Secure were lending on things like jewelry portfolios. So I assumed that those companies had possession of those assets, and there were cases when that was not to be true. And then also, I didn't really understand the possibility of borrower fraud, which is not only something that peer-to-peer suffers from, but any type of lending, bank lending also suffers from fraud. But I really didn't know what the risks of fraud were, and I certainly didn't expect that I would purchase peer-to-peer loans that would end up experience borrower fraud, which I did. So it was really interesting. It was really interesting to look at all these different things, looking back now, 5 years later, what I've learned through those experiences, and mainly through company collapses and borrower defaults, have I learned these things. I think if I wasn't invested in such a wide array of companies and loans, I probably wouldn't have experienced some of these things that I have experienced. And there may be some of you that have not experienced some of these different problems. But if you are a new investor, or you're sort of navigating your way through them, you do need to be aware of some of these things that are very possible that could happen. So go ahead, by the way, and hit that thumbs up button if you can, because it helps me with the YouTube algorithm search. And YouTube tends to give us a bit more love if the thumbs up button is pressed. I appreciate that very much. We have 43 people on the stream tonight, which I'm very happy with. I'm always toying with whether the stream is best midweek or possibly on the weekend. I know during COVID, probably less people are going to be around, on a weekend evening, but this is kind of one of my thoughts to doing a stream. I may just do 2 streams a week if you are enjoying it. So what we have, when we're looking at risk, we have really 3 types of risks that all work together. So we have peer-to-peer, or the crowdfunding companies themselves, the risk that, how risky is a peer-to-peer company itself as an operational company. And then we have loan risk, which is the loans that the peer-to-peer companies are offering, how risky are those loans. And then we also, within that, we have borrower risk. So, within the loans, how risky is a borrower considered to be? And do we have all the transparent information about that borrower to make an informed decision? Again, this really goes towards people that are manually choosing loans. Assets Capital, a company like that, where you can manually select the business loans or property loans that are on there. If you're invested through a company like RateSetter, you don't really need to worry too much about that, but you do need to be aware of some of the things that could happen to the loans and the borrowers that are borrowing money through companies like RateSetter or Funding Circle that has this auto invest. And some of the companies offer auto invest too. So even if you're not manually selecting the loans, you still need to know what could happen to the loans within the portfolio. So what I've really started to pay attention to now is the founders' experiences. Like, what do the directors and the people who are running the companies, what is their experience? Interestingly, so the company that I actually had a long phone chat with just this past week was Invest Fund, and they do asset-backed property loans. And when I was reading the About Us page, I looked at the two founders, David Turner and Mark Hawkins. David Turner was a city trader for 30 years, and Mark Hawkins was a career-based chartered accountant for 35 years. So I asked Invest Fund, I said, what relevance does that have to property finance lending? Do your founders and directors have experience lending out money on property development deals? And what he said to me, well, they're not strictly from that type of lending background, but being a city trader, David has a lot of experience with credit risk. And then Mark, obviously, Hawkins being a chartered accountant, is the financial background. But what they have done is hired people on their non-executive team who are highly experienced in lending and credit risk. So that kind of question, if I had to look solely at the two founders and said, well, one of them is a city trader and one of them is a chartered accountant, that wouldn't really sit well with me as what their experience is in property lending. How do they know anything about property? But then if you look at their non-executive board, you have Robert Burgess, who's chairman of a board, a credit board risk, and on the committee of Oak North Bank, and has a very strong banking background. You have Mark Kibblewhite, who is the managing director of Barclays Wealth and is also an active peer-to-peer investor, and then other people on the team that are very experienced in credit risk and property lending. So you do have to sort of dig down a little bit and look at where the founders' experience and non-directors' experience comes from. One of the other things that I look at is cash burn and how peer-to-peer lending companies are actually funded. If you're an investor through Assets Capital, you would have seen that I think they did their third round of funding through Cedars. A lot of the companies are backed through venture capital, and some of them are just backed privately through family money. Some of the smaller companies that don't need access to the huge amount of funds that someone like Assets might need. Funding Circle obviously is publicly traded. This RateSetter is a much larger company, so if they need funding, they have to go to venture capital funding and rounds of funding that way. So I tend to look at that, and I also look at how much cash do they need to burn if they're not profitable, which most of the peer-to-peer companies are not. So in order, if you're turning a loss as a company, you have to have enough cash, and they call that cash burn, to be able to cover your expenses throughout those negative earning periods. So some of the companies do provide some limited amount of information about how much cash they have on hand. For instance, Grove Street recently reported they have about, I think, 4.7 million cash, which is good when you're going through a downturn. A lot of times it is kind of hard, but you can also ask the companies these questions and say, how are you funded? I'm an interested investor. How are you funded? And do you have enough money to float through periods where you're not profitable? And I always, if you watch any of my Q&As, I'm always asking the companies, are you actually profitable? And most of them, they get a little bit sort of sad when they say no, but then some of them say, well, let me explain why. We're using this amount of money to grow, to expand our team, to put into marketing. And some of them are taking negative profits to go into that growth stage. And you're going to see a lot of peer-to-peer companies doing that because they aren't profitable. Some of the smaller companies like Assets has actually had periods of profitability, and I believe RateSetter has too. LoanPad is not far away from being profitable. So again, a smaller company with lower expenses. So I think it's important to really dig into that. And if you look at companies like Funding Circle, they have close to 100 million pounds a year payroll. So they have to have a huge amount of cash to be able to burn through to, when they're not making money. And when they're reporting, I think, 50 million pounds of loss, you have to have enough money in your bank account as a company to float through that time. So I'm going to go ahead and look at your comments here, see if you have questions. Just pop them in. Again, we're talking about risk tonight, how you can lower your risk as a peer-to-peer lender by looking at certain things maybe you wouldn't have thought about as a lender. Hi, Paul in Portsmouth. And hi, Martin. How are you? I hope you're feeling better. So yeah, Funding Circle has bad returns. Yeah, the Funding Circle is just not doing well as a company at the moment. But I think we've been experiencing that for a while. Zopa, yeah, we'll talk about Zopa. Yeah, Paul's talking about how he used to buy and sell Funding Circle loans in the old days when you could actually do that and there was good liquidity because everybody was sort of excited about lending and borrowing through Funding Circle. You were able to buy and sell loans on the secondary market and sometimes make decent money off that. But that's really not happening anymore, obviously. So anyway, we'll get back to risk. Again, put your comments and questions if you have questions about how you can reduce risk or anything like that. Any other questions that you have, and I'll answer them as we go along. So one of the other things that you want to look at is within risk of the peer-to-peer companies, what type of loans are the companies writing? If you look at, again, I talked about assets being in control of the peer-to-peer company. I'll give you an example of MoneyThing started out as a lender of jewelry. And this was back in 2015. And they started to do other types of loans. They had a loan called RCC, which is, I think, Racing Car Club. And it was a collateral of a bunch of cars that were revolving. And some of the cars, when the loan defaulted, the cars weren't missing. So those assets were not in MoneyThing's possession. So when the loan went missing, when the cars went missing, MoneyThing obviously wasn't able to take possession and to sell the cars to recoup on the defaulted loan. So you may think, well, cars are a good asset, right? They're easily liquidated. You could sell a used car pretty easily. But if the car isn't in the possession of the peer-to-peer lender, they can't liquidate it. One of the other things too is, MoneyThing on that loan had double financing fraud. So the borrower had gone out and double financed. So they have financed with MoneyThing and also another lender. So now you have another sort of problem. Unbolted is another company that holds its assets in its possession most of the time, which is, I feel much better about. So again, look at the risk of the types of loans that the companies are writing. See, property-backed loans are different. They don't, they have, you know what the property is. You can go and put the address in Google, take a look at it. If you live close by, you can drive by, which I've done a few times, of properties that were financed in where I live down in Dorset. MoneyThing and Funding Secure both finance properties down in Dorset and Poole. So I was able to drive by and sort of just see what the properties were. Also within risk, we talk about due diligence levels. Some companies, they do a lot better on the due diligence side than other companies. And when I began as a peer-to-peer lender, I always took what the companies told me as written Bible. That was it. If the companies told me something was true, I believed it to be true, which is very naive. Some of the companies I think are doing really well on their due diligence are Crowd Property, Blend, Assets Capital, Cufflink. I've looked at the documents that they provide, very, very informative documents and valuations. Some companies just don't provide as much in that respect. A company like LoanPad, they just give you a sort of a 1 or 2 page report on the property. that they're loaning against, but some of that is done on purpose. But yeah, I like it when the companies show that they have high levels of due diligence. That shows that they really know what they're doing, and they're putting a lot of emphasis on that to provide information to you as a investor, as a lender, which I think is great. Yeah, I understand. We've trusted them all. We have trusted them all, unfortunately, in some ways. One of the big risk sides of things that I think is a huge warning sign and a red flag when a peer-to-peer company changes direction and what they originally started out doing. So we've had all three cases of the companies that have gone into administration who really changed their lending direction. So collateral lending, funding secure, all started out with the more jewelry-backed pawn-style lending, and then turned towards property-backed lending. MoneyThing was another company that did that. They started out as a jewelry, mainly doing jewelry, and then expanding into other things. But I think it was the property that really sunk those three companies. And MoneyThing is not in administration, but they have ceased taking on any new loans, so they are trying to wind down their loan book. But all four of those companies that have experienced problems have changed directions. So I think if you pay attention to the companies that you're lending through to make sure that they are doing what they are experienced in, like I don't think that MoneyThing had, I don't think there was are experienced property lenders as they were other things that they used to lend on. So that obviously created some problems for them. You look at Funding Secure, which I used to buy a lot of jewelry loans through them, things like Rolex watches, things that I knew were easy to liquidate. And then I saw them going into more riskier assets like Italian book library they had that was a £1.25 million loan on books. And then I saw them do things like classic boats. And then once I saw them going into property, I did start to get a little bit concerned. But the one good thing about Funding Secure is this Italian book library they have, which is in default, is apparently the value has increased from 3 million to 5 million. So I think that sometimes those loans, they can get lucky with the collateral on the assets, but usually when they start to change direction, you really want to pay attention to that. My dad always used to tell me, stick to what you know. So yeah, I think that's important. And then on the company risk, we also again talk about company profitability. Find out, do some research as to why the companies are not profitable. Again, are they in the growth stage? And also look at the accounts that they publish on Companies House. You can see pretty good documentation on the profit and loss sheets of especially the bigger companies. Not everybody puts their accounts up there, but a lot of the bigger companies do. And you can look at companies like Brismo that have a lot of data to support what the companies are doing. I think that's important when you look at risk. So I check out all of the Companies House accounting reports when they are released every year, because I want to see how much money companies are hemorrhaging. Like for instance, Wellesley was one of the companies that reported and was just hemorrhaging a lot of money, and that should always be on your red flag warning sign to look at that. So I'll just look at your comments. Paul says, we need a completely new investment platform. Any ideas? When you say platform, are you talking about within peer-to-peer lending? I think there's some interesting ones out there that are doing things really well. So I've got a couple that I've been looking at this week. One to do with credit card, so like an alternative lender for credit card. I mean, credit card companies are really criminal. They are lending at these ridiculously sky-high interest rates of 18 to 29%. And I think there's a space for peer-to-peer lending within that. Now people can go to companies like RateSetter to get a credit card balances to move to loans like that. But I think there is also a space for an actual physical credit card that was funded by peer-to-peer lending, like more of a credit line. Whereas, rate setter is more like you take the loan out and you have to repay the whole thing. I do like the idea of having a credit line that was for consumers, like Growth Street does it for businesses, but I think that could be a space for that, which there is a company doing that. I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of the company is, but I have it on. Oh, it's called Elfin, ELFIN Marketplace. I'll put that in the chat. They looked actually really interesting. I have to do some more research, but you have Elfin Marketplaces, possibly anyone. Hi, Aki Chappie. Welcome to the stream. John says, how could a peer-to-peer company be able to check for double financing, if at all? I think there are cases where certain things have to be registered in certain places, but for the most of the time, I think it's very hard to spot borrower fraud. I really have to do a good job on checking into the borrower's background history and their credit report, and then do a lot of digging. I don't know what some of the tools that the peer-to-peer companies have to check on borrowers, but double financing is a very tricky one to spot. And it's not the first time it's happened. Moneything is not the only company that has been subject to double financing fraud. There has been borrowers that have gone to one peer-to-peer company and then borrowed from another peer-to-peer company. So yeah, believe it. It's happened before. Saravana says, could I do a session on Bitcoin in the next couple of weeks? The eToro platform. Yeah, we can definitely do a Bitcoin session probably next weekend. Bitcoin, very interested in Bitcoin at the moment, especially since the negative interest rate bond that was released this week, I think is crazy. Andy, do I think rates can drop more? Do you mean interest rate? What do you, Andy, you specifically meaning peer-to-peer lending rates? I do think that they can drop more, but I don't think they're going to drop too much more. I don't think peer-to-peer lending is looking very interesting at 2% for the risk when you can. I mean, the risk of 2% is just probably not worth it. I think for me, probably 3.5%, but very, very low risk is what I'm willing to take. So I don't think they'll go down too much more. But you also have companies that are offering 18%, 12%, 15%, loans. Of course, they have plenty of room to drop down. Steve Manton said, I've stopped new investments in Funding Circle and Lending Crowd. Too many defaults. I'm just letting my loans run out. Yeah, so what you're seeing, Steve, is the inherent problem with business lending. One of the things about Funding Circle was a lot of their lending was done through computer algorithms. And I don't know how much of it was actually looked at by a live person, but that was their basis of their model, was to be able to make a more inefficient lending market where they could run through things through computer models. And I think they're starting to see some of the problems with that. And business lending is already very difficult because you have a lot of things that can go wrong. You're taking, asset backed on debentures and personal guarantees that really aren't worth a lot. And I know because I've lent money to a business that failed myself personally, and the debentures and fixtures and fittings that we were able to sell were a tiny percentage of the money we loaned out. So let's see here. Yeah, so if you have any experience with Elfin, by the way, I might put Elfin Marketplace in there. If you're an investor, I'd like to hear what your feedback is because I thought it to be somewhat interesting. I'm not convinced yet, but we'll see. Ball says, better to buy your own Rolex watch and look after it. Yeah, but they do fall in value too, so it's probably not a good investment. You got to buy the Rolex, which everybody wants. Steve says he's investing in my top 5 plus others. Yeah, I do have a top 5 list. Again, it's just an opinion base. Please don't take that as law. Put your own research and go do your own research on it. But those are the top 5 that I do like at the moment. You can find it on the website. Sign up to the mailing list, the email list on the website, or you can give you the link if you want to look at the newest top 5. If you want to go there, If you already signed up to the mailing list, you can see the top 5 there. I'd say probably my number one, if I had to pick a number one right now, it would be LoanPad, just because I love what they're doing with their loan to values. I like the assets that they have under first charge. They hold a first charge over there. A borrower who has a minimum of 25% skin in the game of their own money. So if I had to pick a top number one right now, it would be LoanPad. Scott says, do peer-to-peer companies invest themselves in all or most of the loans offered to us? Having skin in the game would ensure reasonable due diligence. So yeah, that's a interesting question, because some of them do, but you also have to know there's some inner workings that go along with that. And I just found this out recently too. I'll give you an example. So Cufflink has skin in the game on, I think, most of the loans that they underwrite. But what they do is they have this new thing called compounding interest. So if you select compounding interest, it means that your interest received and any capital of a partial, say, repayment would go back into that loan. And what that does is it takes on Cufflink's skin in the game position. So if Cufflink gets a 0.5% interest in capital repayment, they can take that 0.5% and reduce their 5% skin in the game down to 4.5%. So you've got that. I do definitely prefer companies that have skin in the game. Octopus Choice does. See, LoanPad's lender, Hanf, has a massive amount of skin in the game. But not all of them do. You just kind of have to dig through and look for that. But yeah, I definitely prefer that they do have skin in the game. But they do get it wrong, even though they have skin in the game. Yeah, obviously, Cufflink has had some defaults, but it means that they do have a certain level of confidence in the loans that they are underwriting, which is a really, really good thing for investors, and that does reduce your risk as a lender. Savannah, you're welcome. Chica Boy says 4% risk is the minimum he would want in peer-to-peer lending. Yeah, it's funny, because if we look back to, say, God, I don't know how many years ago, when you could get a bond, a secured bond at 5% from a bank, you wouldn't look at peer-to-peer lending, right, at 6%, probably 10 or 12. Yeah, so you'd be looking at it. But as the interest rates have really fallen on what we can get on savings bonds, then you start to look at peer-to-peer at 3, 4, or 5%, thinking that's a lot better than the 0.1 or 1% if you're lucky that you can get in the savings account. Everybody has their own risk minimum. Paul Bagwell says premium bonds paying me 2% at the moment at maximum investment. Yeah, Paul, I'm presuming, is that 2% with your winnings from the premium bonds? I haven't invested in premium bonds in a long time, but I did do some calculations on that, and I figured out the returns are about 1.5% average on those. So, and then you get the tax-free. It is a bit of fun, but obviously you don't want too much money in at 2%. Chica Boy says, I've maxed out an ISA and LoanPad for 2020. Peer-to-peer, Mike says, peer-to-peer lenders aren't allowed to invest in their loans. It has to be done by a related party. Alan, any idea when Octopus Choice might reopen? I don't have any idea. No, so far they are very tight-lipped. You're welcome, Peter. Yeah, Gary's talking about how the compound interest works in Cufflink. I didn't really have an idea about how it worked either. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's an interesting way of reducing their skin in the game, but it's not very transparent to lenders that their skin in the game is being reduced. Let's see. Yeah, so Andy said that's worth having a global bond tracker and inflation-linked bonds now that the bonds are going negative rates in your portfolio. And a good article about equity portfolio. So today I was looking at actually the benefits of having 100% equity portfolio and not having any bonds. There's obviously some ups and downsides of that. It could seem like a really good idea, but it's inherently dependent on market timing. If you'd have put all of your money into equities when the Dow was 18,000, you'd be in a lot better position going 100% equities than you would be if you did it today with the Dow being about 27,000. So 100% equity portfolios can be great if you happen to stumble in and at the right time. But there's also been periods if you'd have gotten in at the wrong time of between 1998 and 2008 that you could have had an absolutely zero return over 10 years on a 100% equity portfolio. So that's definitely a topic for another live stream. But there were times when I thought, maybe I should just risk it because I'm 47 years old and I got started late in my investing journey. And I've often thought maybe I should just go 100% all in equities because I won't need the money for 10 to 15 years. But, there's an inherent risk to doing that. Currently, I'm about 70% equities and 30% bonds. But I do often think about going 100% equities to try to catch up on lost years that I wasn't investing in the stock market when I was younger. I wish to God I just started when I was 18 years old. If you have kids, tell them to start investing as soon as they can because time is everything when it comes to market investing. McMahon Video says, what's your current view on RateSetter? Will the Access account ever be able to offer its investors actual access? Yeah, I think it will. My view on them is actually, I think they're going to be okay. And the reason is I was looking through some of my loan documents today. We're talking about loan risk today. And if you are a RateSetter investor, you can actually go through and look at all of your loan contracts. And I was looking at the spreads. We'll talk about loan spreads in a minute, but RateSetter publishes what the borrower is paying. So I looked at one of my loans today and it was lent out at 5.1% to me. And the APR was 13.5%. And that's a huge spread. So RateSetter is making the spread. And then also 9% of fees went to the provision fund. So if RateSetter is generating those types of spreads and fees, I don't think that they're going to have a problem continuing to operate in the future. But those rate spreads can be vastly different. I saw one of my loans was paid to me at 6.1%, and the APR that the borrower was paying was 9.9%. And there was 4.6% fees on that one. So it's very, very much different on the amounts of feeds that RateSetter are generating. So yeah, I do think they'll be okay. Do me a favor. We have 56 people on the stream. I want to see that thumbs up. Get to 55. That would be great. If you can hit the thumbs up button, if you like the stream. If you don't, I'll presume you don't. And I will try to do better for you. And my goal is to get that thumbs up exactly to the equal amount of the people on the stream. That would be my greatest achievement of probably the year of 2020. If I can get it to be even, I'd be super happy. Let's see. So yeah, I think RateSetter will be okay. Steve Manton's very happy with Crowd Property so far. Very good communication updates on property progress. Yeah, I think Crowd Property is a good, solid company. If you're looking for asset-backed, property asset-backed lending, really professional outfit. Paul Fitzpatrick says, have you looked at the robo investment companies such as WealthFi, Money Farm? If so, what's your opinion? Yeah, I'm not a fan. I put some money into Wealthsimple and performed much worse than what I've been able to do on my own through using a two-fund index tracker, which is the US equity tracker, and Vanguard, and the global bond tracker has vastly outperformed anything that a robo has done. Not to say that robo won't do, maybe there's times where the robo will do better, but I think long run I can do much better myself. if you can learn about the simplicity of very simple investing, of doing index trackers, if you wanted to do a 3-fund index tracker, you could do global, US, and then a bond fund if you wanted to. I think if you can learn the simplicity of investing that way, you just really don't need a robo tracker. And I think if you look at the robo tracker's performance and graph it next to the index tracker's performance over the long run, you're going to see that the robo will not do nearly as well. So I would definitely am not a fan of a robo. I don't need it. Me Too says pound cost averaging is best. Yes, that's where you say if you have you want to make an investment, you can average in your investment over a period of time. There's actually been some studies on that to say if you had a £10,000 lump of money that you wanted to invest in the stock market, would you be better off putting it in at one time, or would you be better off averaging it in, say, £1,000 a month over 10 months? There's been some studies in that, and I think there's been times where lump sum investing has greatly outperformed dollar or pound cost averaging. But again, that depends on timing, because you could dump your lump sum in right before a market correction, and you'd have done much worse than if you'd have averaged it in over a period of 10 months. But I don't think that either one of them is a bad decision. But I tend to cost average in. So Bordell says, rate setter has paid back my loan. Very happy with them. Good. Gary says, selling options on blue chips to generate income streams. Yeah, so he's talking about share options. That's pretty technical stuff when you start to get into options. Me Too says, I've received all my rate setter capital back plus half the interest earned to date. So whatever is left now cannot be considered a loss. No losses from rate setter is true. Yeah, that's good, really good to hear. Hi, ma'am. Welcome to the stream. Yasha says, do I think the bond ETF has to be hedged to your local currency? I think that you will have. I know the answer to that is no, I don't. And the reason being is if you're a long-term investor, those currency fluctuations are going to even out, especially if you are a cost average investor that invests, money in every month over a period of years. You're going to see times where the currencies kind of fluctuate and cross each other. Vanguard actually has a good article. If you go on the UK Vanguard site and type in about currency fluctuations, they have a good article on why that doesn't matter, and they've done some math studies on that. So now, if you're trying to get in and out of ETFs for very short periods of time, yes, the currency hedge can be a problem. But since I'm a long-term investor, I don't pay attention with that. And then, since most of my investments are in the US dollar, even though I'm investing through Vanguard UK, obviously, I do pay attention to that currency, but I'm not worried about it in the long term. John says, do you spend much time looking for property market stats and views regarding specific potential loan property? I used to when I had more time and I was doing a lot of manual investing, but now because I'm putting smaller amounts into each loans, so I'm really well diversified. I don't have to do that, but I would do it if I was planning on really picking out just a small amount of loans and then putting more money into each one. I would definitely do that type of research. But no, not now. I don't. Andy says, do you think it's worth keeping money invested in funding circle? The answer, personally, no, I don't, and I would not. I've had, I didn't have a lot in them, but I exited out, and I think I have £52 left, and they're all defaults. So, which isn't not terrible, but compared to what I used to hold. Yeah, diversification, I mean, is so important. I think about some of the near misses that I had when I was a very, very new investor. I had a ton of my portfolio total in money thing and lendy. And I think at one point I might have had 30% of my entire peer-to-peer lending liquidity inside of money thing. And I just one day I thought, oh, this is just a bad idea. And I sold off a bunch of stuff and I reduced it down to, I think 10 or 8% of my entire liquidity. And even that I thought was a little bit high, but I wasn't so worried about them at the time. But I could have definitely experienced a big haircut. Again, with Lendy, I had a pretty big amount of money in it with Lendy at one point that I, woke up and smelt the coffee and came to my senses and said, whoa, I don't care how much interest rate they're paying me. I need to diversify and make sure that I don't have too much money with any one particular peer-to-peer lending company. And same with Assets Capital, who I do like. Even LoanPad, I had a pretty high balance with them. And again, even though I love LoanPad, I just have to stick to that basic rule of making sure not to be overinvested in any one single company. Because, I've said this before in the stream that a company CEO once told me that a peer-to-peer lending company CEO said every single company is susceptible to failure, even mine. So when you hear something like that, it kind of wakes you up and to be well diversified. Yasha says, for a long-term investment strategy, do you think it's a good idea to have a small cap value ETF in one's portfolio next to a global index tracker? Yeah, I kind of don't. I don't think it's a bad thing, but small caps can be very, very profitable. There's times when small caps businesses have done very, very well. There's also been times, and I think you'll see this now, where small caps will vastly underperform. It depends on how complicated you want to make your portfolio. So I try to keep mine very, very simple. There are some people that are very big followers of the very simple John Bogle Vanguard formula of having either a 2-fund or a 3-fund portfolio, which would be US index fund, a international index fund, and a bond fund. But then there's other investors that will do 20% in 5 different funds and mix it up. I just think for simplicity, I've always gone for the overly simplistic route of just the three simple funds. And then the US equity tracker has small caps inside of it. So you're not overly exposed to small caps, but it does have small, medium, and large cap companies within that one fund. I've done a lot of playing around in over the last 4 or 5 years, especially when I was newer to index funds. I tried I think I did healthcare, I did biotech, and after looking at my biotech fund do nothing for 2 years, it was just flat. Now, this is the problem. Emotionally, I didn't want to hang on to it anymore because my brain's going, this fund is never going to do well. And the historical performance on the biotech fund for biotech healthcare was great. I think it was, there had been years where it had increased 25%, 30%, and its average is like 11. And I bought it for 2 years and it did zero. It was flat. So emotionally, I didn't want to hang on to it. So getting involved in these different sectors within of trackers or ETFs, I just don't want to deal with it anymore. So the only time I do it now is for just experimental purposes, for being able to provide content for articles that I'm writing for Financial Thing. And most of the time it's just small amounts of money, a couple of thousand shoved into a fund just to see how it'll perform, like Wealthsimple. I just have a few £100 in there just to track it and see how it does over a period of time. But for the most part, my main investments, I just want to keep them simple. Handy says, how many peer-to-peer funds do I recommend for good diversification? I think I like to have minimum 5. 7, I think, is a great number. 7 is good. I think I have a ridiculous amount at 15 or, yeah. So I would say 7 if you can find 7 companies that you're happy with. So let's talk about, again, going back to loan risk. So within risk, you have company risk, loan risk, and borrower risk. Loan risk, one of the key indicators, I think, of loan risk is spreads. So this is the amount that the borrower is paying on their loan, and the amount that the lender, the peer-to-peer lender, is being paid as a return rate. Now, not all peer-to-peer companies show this information, which I think is something I would like to see changed. For instance, Cufflink does not, and I've asked them, well, why do you not show how much your borrowers are paying? And they say, well, we don't want our competition to have that public information. But, to be honest, I think that is information that you could publish as a company. And I definitely like to see it as a lender. Rate Setter shows it. LoanPad shows it. Crowd Property shows it. There's a lot of companies that do. I think this is probably the most accurate representation of how much risk you're taking within a loan, because the way that obviously lending works is if a borrower is considered high risk, he pays a higher interest rate, and you are rewarded as a lender by receiving more interest because you're taking more risk. So if you can see how much how much a borrower is paying on a loan, it gives you a much better indicator of risk. So know that it doesn't always correlate. So for instance, say that rate sets a loan. I told you I have 2 loan contracts. One is 5.1% and one is 6.1%. But the person that I am getting 6.1% from is paying 9.9% interest, whereas the one I'm getting 5.1% from is being paid 13.5% interest. So you can't always just look at what you're being paid as a return and know what type of risk you are taking. So I think that having access to the loan spreads is highly important. And it's probably one of the best ways you can cut down your risk as a peer-to-peer lender. So then also when it comes to loan risk, just know if you're lending money on development loans, they can be highly speculated, especially bigger developments. Now, these developments have to be monitored by people that from the peer-to-peer companies that are experienced, who can go to the development and say, oh yes, you've completed this, we're going to go ahead and release you more of your loan now you've completed this. I'll give you an example of one of the loans I had through MoneyThing that had a problem with drywall, and because the property wasn't inspected correctly by MoneyThing, this didn't, probably because they didn't know what they were looking for, but the developer had used Chinese drywall, and of course that became something you couldn't use. And when the property went into default, MoneyThing found out that the drywall had to be completely removed and replaced. Again, that comes down to what is the experience of the peer-to-peer lender, and are they checking on the development? So that's part of the risk that you are taking. So you got to make sure that the peer-to-peer companies are experienced in monitoring development that they have loaned money against. Another property loan that MoneyThing defaulted on, the subcontractor damaged the plumbing. What happened was the loan borrower went into default and didn't pay the subcontractor, so the subcontractor went in there with hammers and God knows what else and punched holes in the walls, poked holes in the plumbing, which caused extensive damage. And of course, those costs to repair those damages come from loan recoveries on that defaulted loan. So that's the type of lending risk that happens when, development lending that you might not think about when you're lending money on these development property loans. Let's see what else. Yeah, Steve, I agree. I definitely think the FCA should insist that the show the borrower rate. Chica Boy says, if I only had two platforms to invest in, the stock market or peer-to-peer, which one do I think is the safest? Yeah, you're really putting me on the spot. Well, I wouldn't, first of all, just invest in just peer-to-peer or just the stock market. Again, it's not a very simplistic answer, because Chica Boy, if you say to me, well, am I just taking all my money and putting it into one stock? What type of stocks am I buying? There's inherently risky things inside of the stock market, and there's inherently risky investments inside of peer-to-peer. So I think it depends on how you're doing your investing. You could have taken all of your money and plunked it into Lendy and lost 70% of it. You could have taken all your money and put it into Hertz rental cars, and the company filed for bankruptcy recently. So, I don't know if that's a very easy question to answer. I think that I would probably, if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with the stock market. But I guess the reason why the stock market would be considered safer if you invested correctly in the stock market, and that would be properly diversifying, would be that your index tracker can never really go to zero. So that obviously edges out on the lower risk scale. There's no way that your US index equity tracker is going to zero unless America gets invaded by the North Koreans and the country gets taken over, and then your tracker could probably go to zero. But what are the chances of that? Probably zero. So, and then, you've got, again, time scales. If you invest stock market very, very long term, it's much lower risk than trying to pop in and out short term. So. Thank you, everybody. I have a direct even of 50 people on the stream, of 50 thumbs up. I appreciate that. That means you're getting a lot of value, and thank you so much for doing that. That greatly means a lot to me. Hi, Mem. How are you doing in London? What's my thoughts on the S&P given what's happening in the US? Do I feel like it will bounce back? Well, Mem, I think it has bounced back. We're almost at the same level that we were back before COVID happened. So, yes, I think it will bounce back. I wouldn't be surprised if we see another drop. But there are signs that, things in the US are not going to be as bad as people thought. We've got the unemployment they had predicted 20%, turned out to be about 13.5%, which is a big difference. So it was a lot better than they thought. You're seeing equity markets really recovering. Now, a question for me is what's going to happen in the next 2 to 6 months when a lot of companies are going to report their earnings, and we're going to see what really happened. What was the impact over the COVID period? And then does COVID come back again? Some doctors are saying during flu season that there's a great chance that COVID comes back again and we're all forced to go back into this lockdown. So, that's things that could affect the S&P 500. But I think that over the very long term, you are absolutely going to be fine. So key is leave your money in. Don't try to time the market. Buy and hold. Alan says most professional valuations and credit reporters seem to be using info provided by the borrower, so it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. Yeah, valuations on properties and especially developments can be vastly different. You could pick 3 different valuation companies and probably get 3 incredibly different numbers. So, but some of the valuations are better than others, I've noticed. I think what you'll find is the companies that are very good at what they do, the peer-to-peer companies, they They look at the valuation that the third party has provided to them, but they also do their own due diligence, which is highly important. So every company is different when it comes to that, but some do it a lot better than others. Lendy did it terribly. Funding Secure didn't do it well, and we've seen what's happened to them. Chica Boy says, I've invested in 9 peer-to-peer companies, but not the stock market as it's more complicated. Stock market, actually, Chica Boy, is very, very simple. It's really been designed to be complicated to confuse and to steer people towards financial advisors. So, Chica Boy, if you read the book, the Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John Bogle, rest in peace. I will write that down. Little Book of Common Sense Investing. If you go to my website, there's a link to the book on there if you search for it on Amazon. It's a great book. It really demystifies stock market investing. You know, I know there are people out there, especially who are watching this stream, that like to pick their own stocks out and they like to read financials and do research. I have plenty of friends that do it. And, you know, if you're experienced in that, you have the time to do that. Great, totally understand. But, you know, for the most of us, we want a very simplistic form of stock market investing, and index trackers are that vehicle that you can use long term, where you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to do any research. You don't have to try to pick stocks. And over the long run, they'll track the indexes and provide very adequate returns. So, and Chico, I think it is very important to invest in the stock market along with peer-to-peer, and not just have all of your money into peer-to-peer lending. That's very, very risky. I think diversifying not only peer-to-peer, but, you know, be okay to have a little bit of Bitcoin and maybe some gold, have some savings. Make sure you have six to 12 months of cash. So if you run into an emergency, you have enough for 6 to 12 months of your living expenses. Mike says FCA rules have been changed to be much tighter on what has to be displayed now with regards to risk, including full interest rate. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's absolutely imperative to know what type of interest rate borrowers are paying. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining the stream. Mike's very knowledgeable on all the things that I sometimes miss because I have a lot of information that I have to keep up on. Mike fills me in. Great addition. Yeah, Chica Boy, get that book. It's absolutely that book, I could say, was pivotal in changing my mind about investing in the stock market. I used to be so against it. I just thought it was so risky and so complicated. And I had given my money to financial advisors twice in the past when I was younger, who had returned me very, very little on my money. I think one guy did 2.5% over 7 years. That's my own mistake because I didn't know what he was invested in. I didn't know he was very inexperienced. He came as a recommendation. So after that, I thought, well, if the professionals can't give me a good return on my money through the stock market, why would I ever want to invest in the stock market? And then I stumbled upon this little book of common sense investing, and I read the book, and it was like this huge aha moment of like, wow. Investing is so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. We don't need to look through the 20,000 different unit trusts trying to pick out, are we going to go with the Woodford Fund? Are we going with the Fundsmith? Are we going with Invesco? Are we going to go with Fidelity? We don't need to have to make those decisions. We could just pick one simple investment vehicle throughout our entire lifetime and track the market. And over the long run, you know, the S&P 500 has returned, I think, 10% on average a year since its inception. And if we can track the market and get a piece of that, then we don't need to worry about trying to pick shares. You know, share picking is so difficult because it's so heavily dependent on market timing compared to how your results and also your emotions. Can you buy and hold? Can you buy and hold through the bad times? Can you buy and hold through when your stock is racing up? Do you know when to get rid of it? Do you hold it till retirement? You Last I think 3 weeks ago, I bought a few Norwegian cruise line shares when the shares were $10 because I thought, I'm just going to do it just to see what happens. And my brain started. Actually, let me back up just a little. I actually bought Carnival and I sold them 2 days later because they started to drop and my brain was going, Carnival, no good. Let me buy Norwegian. Bought Norwegian. I think it doubled over 3 weeks, and then my brain's going, I don't want to hold this long term. I don't know what's going to happen to the cruise line industry. I need to sell. We're talking about a very small amount of shares. It wasn't even a big amount, but that's just my brain is looking at these shares every day, watching the prices and being so emotionally tied to what's going on with those prices. And my tracker, I just don't worry about it. I know I leave it there long term. One tracker, two trackers, and I'm done. I don't have to worry about it. So I did sell those Norwegian shares, by the way, and took the money, and that was it. So maybe they'll double again in value, and I'll be looking back and going, ugh, I should have held them for another year. I would have doubled again. So Scott says, if you have any euro holdings, check out. Returns are reasonable. While you are doing good for many people by funding off grid solar system to replace terrible kerosene lighting. John says stock market results are very dependent on market sentiment of others. Yes, because it's demand and supply. Peer-to-peer on your own diligence to a larger degree. So peer-to-peer if you have the time. Yeah, I think peer-to-peer can be a really solid investment if you have the time to do research and look and make sure you're investing through the right companies. Cheeky Boy says, I will disperse my peer-to-peer this year. Cheeky Boy, that might not be the answer. You don't necessarily need to get rid of your peer-to-peer, but have a portion of your investment in peer-to-peer and have a portion in other things, in savings and in the stock market. That's called true diversity. That's what you want to do. UK Sol, hi from Tokyo. I have 3 peer-to-peer accounts, Cufflink, Relendex, and PropLend, and find they give far more solid returns than stock. First charge back property loans is the key. Yep. Yeah, and again, you want to be keeping an eye because there is a possibility of any one of those companies could fail. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those companies, but judging them by what we've seen in the past, there is always that possibility of company failure. So that's why I like to have more than 3 companies in my portfolio of peer-to-peer lending, because I've had 3 companies fail in my portfolio, and if I just was invested in just collateral lending and funding secure, I would be probably at a 20%, probably an 80% loss so far. So there is a lot to be said about diversification. Yashar says, with regards to a 6 to 12 months emergency cash in a savings account, can one's portfolio still benefit from a part in money market fund, or is it redundant? I don't see the point in a money market fund, Yashar, because they just don't pay enough interest. You can just put the money in a bank and get almost the same. Chica Boy says, I do not and will never trust financial advisors. Yeah, there's some really bad ones out there, and it doesn't take that long to become a financial advisor. You just need to take some training and some tests. But I think you're better off just DIY, do it yourself. Research, learn about it's your money. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I speak to. I ask them, "We have an ISA. What's inside the ISA that your financial advisor has invested in?" Oh, I really don't know. Or yes, it's in an Invesco fund. What's inside that Invesco fund? Oh, I have no idea. So basically, you're just giving the trust of somebody your money, and without knowing what they're investing in. Even if you know what the fund name is, sometimes people don't know what the fund is, what it does, how it operates, what the fees are. By doing it yourself, it's the best way to have full control and really understand what it is you're invested in. Hey, you're welcome, Adam. I do try to be honest as I can, sometimes to the chagrin of the peer-to-peer lending companies, but
That's the way it is. Chica Boy says, I have 12K in funding secure. I can't get out. Yeah, be patient. I think you'll get some of it back. I don't know how much. Depends which loans you're in. Some of them, some of the loans in Lendy that have gone through administration are seeing some okay recoveries. So, yeah. Craig Graham says, alternative to John Bogle's book is Investing Demystified by Lars Kroger. Much the same message and impact as you describe. Yeah, I love investing books that really break down how to come up with a simplified investing strategy that you can use long term, that you don't have to change. I've just made so many mistakes trying to time markets and move in and out of shares and funds, and it just long term. I read about a woman who I was reading an investment forum yesterday about a woman that sold when the Dow hit 26,000. She sold out of everything, and then now she's sitting out, and she doesn't know when to get back in. I think she had 800,000 in index trackers, and she figured she tried to time. If you like to read about, there's a great forum. I'll give you the link here. It's a U.S. forum, which is an incredible resource for index tracking, investing, why you should use passive. Go ahead, check that forum out. It's called the Bogle Heads. It's been running a long time. It's people that follow John Bogle from Vanguard's investment strategy, and there's tons of great forum links and reads in there, and they have a wiki about how to do the simple 2 or 3 fund portfolio, and there is one for the UK. There's a wiki page for the UK to do. You can show you how to do it in the UK, which I've kind of already explained. You can do the US index tracker, equity tracker through Vanguard or Fidelity, and then couple it with a global tracker if you want to put some of the downside risks and have a bond fund. So I'll just run through again what else. Risks. You have to be careful with valuations because they can be highly subjective. Make sure that you pay attention to what peer-to-peer companies are doing when they change direction. For instance, one of the things that popped up on my radar was on Bolted was a jewelry, primarily a gold lender, and then I saw they had this loan against a sculpture that had been paid £1.2 million for it. But normally I wouldn't invest in such things because I think if you try to liquidate something like that, it's very dependent on finding a buyer that would want to buy a sculpture. You may be sitting on it for a long time. Who knows? So then I thought, well, is Unbolted changing direction? Are they going from jewelry loans, which they understand, gold being very easy to liquidate, and now they're offering expensive sculptures, things that are very niche? And then when I started to read about the loan, the loan was $260,000 based on a auction valuation of $650,000 minimum. The guy paid $1.2 million, so the loan to value was pretty low. And then it had a link to the Sotheby's auction of this sculpture. Hopefully the information's accurate. So you could say, well, yes, Unbolted changed direction, but they also offered pretty sensible information about this sculpture. But I do tend to really pay attention to when they pivot and change, especially when they go for really 90-degree pivots and say jewelry loans into property loans. I start to get very skeptical. Just remember that a lot of borrowers in peer-to-peer lending they've been unable to get high street bank financing for a reason. Not always. For instance, Hanth Capital, who is LoanPad's loan source, they have very much a network of people that they loan money to that has been built up over 30 years, and they prefer to go to Hanth than a bank. And the rates are not too much higher. They're a little bit higher, but they're not always bad people. But some of the times peer-to-peer lending borrowers are people that cannot get loans through regular high street banks. So you do need to know about that borrower risk. And also borrowers can cause problems. There's been a couple of court cases. Unbolted is going through one now where they have a borrower that has 18 loans that they've defaulted through. Borrower has taken them to court and has stated that They are alleging technical legal breaches through the loan documentation, and that's been going on since March 2019. So we're now a year plus into that. So, be aware that the borrower can cause problems on loans. Lendy had a case of a borrower suing them over breaches in the loan documents, and then they were threatening to sue every single peer-to-peer lender. It didn't happen. We've got Rebuilding Society loan I had. It was a trucking company. That this loan I bought in 2015 is still going on today. That's 5 years later. The owner filing bankruptcy. And Able Rate has a shipping container loan that went bad from 2016. The owner has been consistently delaying court proceedings and then hiding assets. 4 years later, we're still having a problem with that borrower. So you need to be aware that borrowers can really throw spanners into these loan engines, and that can happen. That is a real risk. And then we have borrower fraud too, which is another risk. 2 loans that I had on Rebuilding Society defaulted before their first payment. They were both fraudulent loans. One of the loan borrowers was a retail shop, and turned out one of the lenders had written on a forum that he lived nearby. He went to the shop, and the shop was not even operational. So Rebuilding Society didn't check to make sure that the shop was even operational, and was a victim of loan fraud. That again could happen in banks and bank lending too. So that is a real risk. Also, if you're doing manual lending or things like property asset-backed lending, make sure that you understand how many loans an individual borrower has on the platform, because you may be invested into multiple loans under the same borrower, but could be different projects. And MoneyFin was famous for lending out to multiple loan projects to the same borrower. And then the one I just told you about, Unbolted, the guy had 18 different loans, and I was invested through all 18 of them because I was in the auto invest system. So it would put me into all of the loans. Thankfully, I had a very small amount because I, at the time, had my minimum amount set very low. But if you had a decent amount and you're invested in all 18, you might not be very happy. Most of the peer-to-peer companies do let you know, if a borrower has multiple loans on the platform, they'll list it on the loans, but just pay attention to that on the information. See, hi, Derek says there's a number of platforms for investing. Robinhood Trading 212. Yeah, Robinhood's an American platform. I don't know if they're in the UK yet, but they do free trading. But a lot of the, I know Vanguard does free loan, free. You can buy stocks for free now. But you can use those platforms. If you're in the US too, there's a company called Webull, Webull. Yashar says, do I think the Baltic peer-to-peer market is viable, considering the strict lack of regulations and fraud cases? I would say no, I do not think it's viable, because exactly the reasons you wrote. There is fraud, there is no regulation, very little regulation. And if one of those Euro peer-to-peer companies goes under, you will probably not get your money back. So why risk it? If you can use UK, at least they're regulated. Yes, Paul, imagine that. Lendy was a Cows Week sponsor. Yeah. And let's see. So yeah, watch out for multiple borrowers, multiple loans to the same borrower. And if you're doing property-backed lending, make sure you look at what the asset is. It's just far easier to get rid of some assets and sell them than others. If you have a rural farmhouse in the Northern Hebrides in Scotland, that's going to be a lot harder to sell than a £250,000 house in Bournemouth. It's very easy to liquidate. So just think about that. Even if you're getting a higher interest rate, I sometimes don't think the risk is worth it, especially if you're just getting parcels of raw land that are going to be developed. Be very aware that those can be just very difficult to sell if they are defaulted and have to be sold on an auction for recovery. Lendy, for example, put out a loan on a gravel quarry in Scotland. That type of business, not easy to sell, and that loan did default, so pay attention to that. And also, the third part of the risk too is you do want to look at your own portfolio risk on, do you have a lot of money in higher risk loans versus a small amount into lower risk loans or companies? I try to have a very balanced portfolio now that is actually turning more low risk. I used to be more of a high risk. I think I was 40% high risk, 40% medium risk, 20% low. And now I would say I'm more 60%, 70% low risk and 30% medium risk. Totally got rid of the higher risk. So you have to look at your personal financial situation, say, what do I have invested in peer-to-peer that I can afford to lose? What if I had money in a peer-to-peer company and it went out of business and I didn't get any of it back, would I be okay? Would I be comfortable, sleeping at night, or is it going to keep me awake? Don't put your life savings, obviously, into any one type of investment, being stock market or peer-to-peer lending, especially mini bonds. Big piece of advice I can give you about risk: diversify. Spread it across. You may not get the best returns. You may not be getting the highest returns possible, but ultimately, if something happens, you'll be able to sleep at night, and that's the key. That goes along with this idea of people that say, well, do I want a portfolio of 100% shares and equities? You have to ask yourself, if the market did what it did during COVID and it dropped 30%, would you be okay leaving 100% equity portfolio alone? Would you be able to look at it and not feel sick to your stomach? If the answer is yes, you can go 100% equities if you want to take that risk. But just make sure that you do something that's comfortable for you, that you have a risk level that you'll be able to sleep at night, isn't going to financially cripple you if something happens, and something that you're comfortable. And that's just different for everybody. It's somebody that makes £1 million a year in income has a different feeling about investing $100,000 than somebody that makes £20,000 income and is investing $10,000 into peer-to-peer. They just have different comfort levels, and what is considered high risk to you may not be considered high risk to me, and vice versa. I may not want to invest in 12 or 15% loans through Rebuilding Society, and you may be okay with that. So you just have to sum all of this up and decide what's okay for you. So I think I've kind of covered everything today about due diligence, looking at company founder background experience, making sure that the people running the companies really know what they're doing. Don't have somebody that used to be a car salesman or own car dealerships doing property lending, because they're probably going to screw it up. Make sure that the company people, the directors and people running and making business loan decisions have experience in business loans. Read the About Us sections on the peer-to-peer lending companies themselves, even the big ones like RateSetter. Make sure you know what their experience is and become familiar with that. Watch out for company changes, when they start issuing loans on things that they've never done before. One of the red flags example was Property Partner when they started doing second charge development lending. It was just a red flag to me, because that's not their business. They're used to issuing properties and people buying shares in those properties and having equity in property, not in development lending. So that was a red flag for me, and it was one that when I met the CEO, I said to him, I just don't love the fact that you're going to second charge development lending. And his argument was, well, we want to offer 12% returns to stay competitive. Well, okay, I understand, but that's a red flag for me. Look at the company's profitability and see if they're making money. How long is it going to take them to start making money? You can usually do pretty rough calculations on that too. If you look at their profit and loss sheets, a company is making a certain amount of revenue a year and they're charging a 2% spread on their entire loan portfolio. So if they have a loan portfolio of 20 million pounds and they have a 2% spread, you can easily figure out, well, that's 400,000. How long is it going to take them to make money? What type of a loan portfolio size do they need to cover all their payroll expenses and their staff? If you look at Companies House and look at the accounting, you can easily at least get some kind of estimate of where they stand financially. I think that's important. Seems like a lot of work, but honestly, when you're putting your money into a peer-to-peer lending investment, you do want to be somewhat secure. So there you go. I've covered risk today. I hope that was helpful. I'll just look at the comments and see if there's anything out. Derek says a certain problematic loan on Essex Capital is a Scottish castle. Exactly. And I bet you that Scottish castle is going to be very, very difficult to liquidate. Alan says, I reckon SpaceX would be a great long-term stock. Yeah, well, if you own an index tracker, the beautiful thing is you'll have that. You'll have SpaceX or Tesla inside of that tracker, so you get a piece of exposure to that company. I'm a little tired to actually. Somebody else who just texted me is watching the stream, so I look a little tired today. So, yeah, my brain's sort of going 1,000 miles a minute. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up now. We've been going for a really, really long time. But again, thanks for coming to the stream. And I don't know if we'll continue to do Saturday streams. Maybe I'll do one next week, but I'll send out an email if you're on the list. Or go to the website. There'll be a link to the latest stream on there. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me, and subscribe to the channel, please. I think I'm at 499 subscribers, so I just need one more for the big 500. The ultimate goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers. That's my next sort of target goal. But thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Have a great evening and stay COVID free.